I'm here at the first International Congress of Varginha 30 years ago, and I'm with my friend here, Rodrigo Betim. It's been a while since we last met, right? He's the forum, does a bunch of crazy stuff too, plays the flute, right? He's really cool, a great guy. I wanted you to tell us, you're here attending the event. What do you think about it? And 30 years after the Varginha case, what conclusion have you come to?
The conclusion I come to is the truthfulness of the facts, not just the ones presented, right? By you, by Petit, Pacatinho, and everything that's happening here at this very moment. But also the truthfulness of the women who were girls at the time and today are, there's our city.
Grandma, now she's a grandma, man.
Yeah, time goes by, right? So it's a job that's being very well presented here, very well documented, and it's a record, right? This will go down in history, not just for Varginha, but for the history of Brazil. The way you put together the facts, the documents, and the extensive research you did on the case, that's amazing. So, congratulations, really.
And so he still owes me a digital versatile disc, right? There are some things I could mention, right? But let's see if we can meet up to have some pizza or something, and we can make that exchange.
Exactly. It's a document, it's research that I did. In fact, we took part in the first International Ufology Congress in the city of Campinas. When we were leaving, we saw the craft. Remember that?
I remember that.
So I have from 1999, I have the digital versatile disc, which is the recording from when it started, right? And the ship is very clear there, right? Its transformation and everything.
In fact, a little thing comes out, another small ship on the side.
Several, it splits into 3. It's something crazy like that, right? And after that time, I spent 5 years researching the case, and several things happened. Among them, there are newspaper clippings. So I have these documents and I'd like to give them to you, these documents, so we can make a show for you to put on your channel.
No problem, just give them to us and we'll pass them on to you later. Then these images, the whole story.
Exactly. And hey, congratulations once again. I'm happy to see you here again. Congratulations to your team and the work you've been doing in Brazilian ufology. To me, you're one of a kind. I've always told you this, I really admire you for your work. Thank you.
That's how it is. We're ufologists, right? But nowadays, we've also ended up becoming promoters of ufology, right? Doing this work to spread, right, to a larger number of people, these ufological truths. So that's it. Thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you. That's it. Let's keep looking for other people here at the International Congress of Varginha. Look, I'm here with Councilman Miguel Lima, Municipal Architecture of Varginha, and he was one of the witnesses. He has a story to tell that happened the day before, right before the girl's sighting. Miguel, nice to meet you. Tell us what you experienced back then.
Edson, it's a pleasure to meet you here as well at this important event for Varginha, which is the first international seminar. But Sueli, right, Sueli, my assistant, asked me to mention this here. But it's a reality, right? Because, in fact, my family and I were part of this story. One thing I can say is that I don't just believe, but I participated and I saw, right, the phenomenon, right? So, what I can tell you here is this. On the 19th of that year, one day, around nightfall, my wife, my 2 sons, a friend of my younger son at the time, and we were all there. My younger son is even here. He's at the event right now. He was 10 years old, and the older one was 14 years old at that time, right? And I was sitting on a porch that we have there, having dinner, chatting with the 3 boys, my 2 sons.
Where was this here?
Varginha? You mean there? The area? Yeah, I live there, in São Geraldo. In São Geraldo, in Geraldo, you know? I still live there, actually. So, from my balcony, there's a window where we can see over to the Lagamar side, and there we say it's the neighborhood. It's Jardim Aurea, which at the time didn't have that many houses. No, we could see more of the horizon, and there was a pasture there, let's put it that way. At that moment we were chatting while the kids played. I said, Isabel, look at that beautiful thing, and went to the window in my area to show her. Then, over there, at that place, it was raining. Actually, at that time, it was raining, it was nighttime. I think back then it was around 7 or 8 o'clock at night, more or less. Then I said, Isabel, look at that beautiful thing over there. We saw lights. The lights were like this. There was a bigger one in the middle, kind of like a moon, really, a clear light, right? And on the sides, two more on each side, like this, two smaller ones on each side, two smaller ones. They were like perfectly parallel.
Like one in the middle.
Bigger, large, and two small ones, two on each side. Yeah, in a way, like really flat. They like the lights, right? The smaller ones and this bigger one shining a beam of light toward the earth.
That one shining a beam downward.
Which they call interesting. At the time, right there, I said, look how cool that is, that light shining and these other lights on the side. So then we got to the window, all of us, my kids and my wife and all. And then suddenly it all went out. Everything turned off. This is something I'm talking about. It happened really fast, you know? It went out, then it lit up again, and then that bigger light kept shining, and those smaller ones stayed in different positions, more perpendicular like this. And then it went out again and left quickly. It was gone. That was it.
And what color shade did those lights have?
So the smaller ones were bright, kind of a mid-tone, kind of reddish, you know, some different colors. But the one I noticed the most was the one in the middle, bigger, shining downward. But it's a bright light. Imagine if I look at the sky, like the moon, you know, that kind of bright light. There was nothing then.
It was sort of whitish, you know?
Whitish, exactly like that.
And it would shine the light down.
So at that pace on the horizon, we could see over there, you know, and then what happened was later, the boys had dinner, played around. I went to take my son's friend home, who's the son of a judge. He doesn't live in Varginha anymore. So the boys used to study together here. So my son would always go to the judge's house, and the judge's son would come over to our house and so on. Then when I got to my friend's house, the judge's, I talked to him and said, I just saw a phenomenon. I don't know what happened. I know what I know happened. It was just starting, a sign of a sign of a sign. I don't know what happened. I know what happened. I have it like this, always. Every day I follow along, but this is my own participation, and I'm sure many others have participated too. I'm sure that in my belief we're not alone in this universe, so I believe in extraterrestrials, so I think your work is extremely important.
Miguel, we appreciate your testimony and your support for him. Come here, Suellen, who arranged for him to give us a little performance here, and Suellen. I was saying that there are some people who work at the city hall and who also had some other types of contact with Casa Varginha. They heard something and so on. That's exactly right.
There are many stories, many people talk about it, but we believe that many are afraid to speak up, afraid of suddenly being labeled as crazy. But I'm sure that from now on, many will start to give their testimonies.
I hope that happens too. And it's that thing. It's 30 years, guys. We've reached 30 years. The case is alive, strong, and new testimonies are coming. I just met my friend Vittorio Pacatini here, one of the investigators of the Varginha case. He's here. At this 30th anniversary celebration of the case, I wanted to ask you what you think of the event and what are the prospects for the Varginha case from now on.
My dear friend and partner Edison Boaventura, it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's a historic moment for all of Brazilian ufology because 30 years for us feels like it was yesterday. But a lot has happened over all these years, and now we are celebrating the victory of Brazilian ufology. After all the setbacks, all the problems, the tensions that we went through, to uncover a large part of the events that happened here in Varginha, where extraterrestrial beings were located, captured, and taken out of the city. For us, it's a great joy. In fact, I would like to congratulate you on your excellent lecture, along with Petit, with Ramalho, and all the teams. And for us, from now on, we persist in the research. We will never give up. We are living a wonderful, very special moment with the arrival of Dr. Italo Venturelli, who I am sure will encourage other key witnesses, because we know that videos and photos of the creatures are here in Varginha. It's just a matter of time we will have access to this material. Therefore, my expectation, and I'm sure my colleague Boaventura's as well, and all of Brazilian ufology is very positive. And once again, celebrating 30 years is a victory for the greatest ufology in the world, which is Brazilian ufology.
That's it, a brief word here from my friend Pacatini. But before we finish this interview, because there are a lot of people, we've been around, talked to one, talked to another, talked to the city hall manager, researcher, witness. What did you think about that hearing in Washington when, for example, that United States Army Corps of Engineers military officer from the United States Air Force said that there really was a C-17 here in Brazil showing American involvement? What did you feel?
Boaventura, I got chills down my spine, just like you said. It's like a World Cup victory, because we already know about this American military movement, about the C-17 military plane that landed at Viracopos Airport in Campinas. Having the confirmation from an Air Force colonel, an F-15 Eagle pilot among other aircraft, confirming that the operation happened and that because of this, 30 or 40 people from the United States Air Force would be involved in this operation to make it happen. And even calling on these people, come forward and say what you know. For us, hope is what remains, and I have the feeling that other Americans will come forward after the call from that American Air Force colonel. A victory?
That's definitely it. So I also want to express my solidarity with you after that dirty trick the television pulled on you. We know that you never paid anyone any money. We never paid any witnesses. It was always for free. Everything for the sake of research and investigation. And unfortunately, there is something to deconstruct. The Varginha case, but we will not falter. We will not stop. The Varginha case will remain firm and strong.
Absolutely, for sure. For us, it was a very unpleasant surprise to see a television network that has always worked so well with us, one we trust, to leave it in the hands of a person who acted in extremely bad faith and joined two other detractors to tell a lie. But I wanted to send a message to Military 3, who had the nerve to go public and tell such a lie. Man, I swore to protect you the day I met you, you scoundrel. It won't be by my hand that the military's whip will strike you and throw you into a dungeon for the rest of your life for betraying your country. I will keep my word, I will protect you. Despite your treachery, you are dealing with the ufology of the world, which is Brazilian ufology, and we will move forward.
That's it, we're here. So during the festivities, stay with me here because I'll show you more interesting testimonies. I'm here with Tiago Tiquete from Unidentified Flying Object magazine. Now he's in Guevar's place. And I wanted to ask him, what do you think about the event here, the 30th anniversary of the Varginha case? And what's your assessment? Because, Unidentified Flying Object magazine has published many articles about the Varginha case. And after 30 years, what's your assessment?
Edson, first, thank you for inviting me to this interview. The event is historic, isn't it? It's been 30 years since the case you had here back in 1996. Have you seen how this has changed? I think the city has finally understood the importance of having an international event here. I hope it keeps growing, that more researchers come, that we talk more about this case. In the past 30 years, EDSON, a lot has changed. When they ask me about this, they say we have to go back to the beginning, to fishermen like you, Petit and Pacatini, who were there at the start of the case. Because in the past 30 years, a lot of things have been made up, a lot has become folklore, and a lot has been lost over time. But more and more evidence and testimonies from back then have also been discovered. And I draw a very interesting parallel with what happened in Roosevelt in 1947, which was only rediscovered 30 years later in 1974. So, Varginha was never like Roosevelt because it's been investigated by ufologists since 1996.
Let me make a parenthesis here. Roosevelt took 30 years for us to know the names of the military personnel. Varginha took 3 months, and we already knew the names of those involved.
And more, you keep looking for more witnesses who had some kind of involvement in this cover-up, the Varginha Edson case. And you know very well it's not just about Mudinho's explanation. We know that. Anyone who bases their explanation on that doesn't understand the magnitude and scale of the case, because there are other witnesses. The girls who saw it, the firefighters who took part in the capture, the military personnel we know about who were also involved, even if one or another today denies what they said back then. But there are so many elements that if this were a trial, the judge would tend to give a verdict as true. This case was real. Something happened here.
So you see that practically all ufologists, or the great majority of them, have this view that the Varginha case is something important that should be continued. There are contaminations, yes, but it's like this. We are here living a historic moment in Varginha, 30 years since the case. A lot of people, witnesses from that time, ufologists, and there are doctors present here as well. It's a grand thing, but now I wanted to change the focus a bit, which maybe you don't know. But Tiago Tiquete, he's the son of a military man, right? His father has already passed away and all, but his father worked at the 3rd Commando Aéreo Regional there in Rio de Janeiro, and when he was little, his father used to take him to see unidentified flying object documents. Isn't that right? Tell us a little bit about that story.
That's true, my father. At the end of his career, he was in the Air Force, a pilot, and at the end of his career, his name was Luis Mauro Tiquete, Colonel Tiquete. He worked in the A2 of the 3rd Commando Aéreo Regional, which is the Air Force's secret service in Rio de Janeiro. Since he was married to my mother, every weekend we'd take an express bus from Barra to the base near Santos Dumont, as the 3rd Commando Aéreo Regional is there. And every time I went there, I would ask him, Dad, do you have anything? And he always said no, until one day he said yes. And then he asked a soldier to bring 2 cardboard boxes full of documents, but they were typewritten documents. Back then there were no cell phones. It was in 1992 or 1993. He brought the box and I looked through it. And I saw a photo, which to this day hasn't been released, that was a clear photo of an unidentified flying object of an object. It was a flying object, metallic, silver, in the classic disc shape, no windows, nothing, next to the plane, as if the pilot had turned and taken a photo, those that we used to print back in the day, you know. So, I wanted that photo, but my father wouldn't let me, and there were no cell phones or color Xerox back then.
Me too, if I were in the military. And if my son asked, I'd say, unfortunately, no. Otherwise, it would complicate everything here. But then later, if I had a chance, since it was my son, I'd find a way to copy it or get something.
I copied it.
You copied it? I did, my father. Tell us about it.
My father told me, you have 10 minutes to look at whatever you want, and I did. I started picking out some of the shorter cases from those documents and began copying them by hand. When I got home, I had copied about 16 cases, I think. 16 or 17 cases, I copied them and went to my typewriter. And I presented this once, and you, Edson, came up to me at the event and said, Tiago, what you presented, I have that document. I don't know if you remember that. I remember.
So here's what I'm going to do since we're talking about this. I'm going to show you this document because it's really interesting, right? And it was a long time ago, and it had the date. I said, wait a minute, this date here, do I have the actual document where this happened? You saw a list of cases, right? But I have the document.
I'll send you the case list. You'll see. It was part of the Air Force's Secret Service. And my father would bring me every day when we met Xerox copies of newspapers with the letterhead of the 3rd Comar, because they archived that too from the newspaper Última Hora o Globo Jornal do Brasil. They controlled what was happening at that time. And I was lucky and had the opportunity to see all those documents, which were a lot of documents that the 3rd Comar had, and to this day, Edson outside. Your document, the one you mentioned, I can't recall if it was leaked, but none of the others I copied were.
Exactly. There's just one, the only one that's on Tiago Tiquete's list, which I have a copy of, right? And actually, I've even managed to get more copies of that thing. And I talked to the captain who was on the plane, right? And I talked to another co-pilot and the captain. He wrote a book. He lives in Brasilia. I was at his apartment in Brasilia, and he gave me a book. And then he tells in one of the chapters this story, the one that's recorded, but in a poetic way without giving many details. But he sent me an autographed book because he wanted to record that event because it was a very unusual thing that happened. So these things only make us more certain that it's worth doing research. How long have you been researching?
It's been 30 years, right? A bit less than you since you've done it longer.
I'm going to turn 46, right?
Just a little more than me, but 30 years. And that's what drives us, right? We don't have the answer we want to know. We're curious to understand what's happening because something, Edson, is happening. And it's not just one or another case that will say if it's true or false. Ufology research, there's still a lot out there to discover.
Back in Brasilia some time ago, I think it was 2009, they released a big stack of documents in the National Archives, 1,000 and something. Then another big stack came out, and every year they release something. But like when you analyze, you also analyze the documents. I do that too. When you look at those documents, what do you notice? Are they shallow or do they bring something deep?
First, they take a long time to release them. And what they do release is the simplest thing in the world. They're never going to release something that really proves or has strong evidence. I'm telling you, even in the old days, the Air Force, by a directive order from Sato, who was the Minister of the Air Force, all documentation related to unidentified flying objects was to be sent to the National Archives at the end of the year. This is not being done continuously because the department that used to do this within the Air Force was shut down. And I know this because people who work in the military whom I have contact with have already told me this. So I don't know where these documents go. We don't know where they end up. Or maybe a lot is sent at once, but that directive order that existed is not being followed.
I see. And I think it's because they changed it. It used to be Condabra, which was the Brazilian Aerospace Defense Command that took care of this, and now it's become Comai. So maybe some responsibilities ended up being reassigned somewhere, or they weren't reassigned anywhere. So I know that the documentation, the pilot's reports, come in through a phone line dedicated to that. And usually the Brazilian air traffic control centers also collect this information. But as you said, it's really shallow, ultra secret files, secret, they've never been revealed. Now, the more superficial ones like little lights and so on, those we get access to from time to time. But it's already a sign that they're interested and concerned about this phenomenon, isn't it? So I'd like to thank Tiago and for this interview, this chat we had here. The party is still going on. Today is only Saturday. There's still all of Sunday. There will be more lectures and everything else. And that's it. Keep following us. I'm here now with Marco Antonio Petit, who took part in the case. Varginha, 30 years, this wonderful Congress we're having here. I wanted to ask you this. After 30 years, what has changed in the Varginha case, and is there any news? Is there any next step after these 30 years?
Look, I consider the following. We are living through a historic moment these 30 years. And this event here is giving us the opportunity to show that everything that even in more recent times has been done to try once again to bury the case, ends up coming back in a negative way. For those who are behind this cover-up process, the case has enormous strength. New testimonies, even from doctors, are emerging. In other words, it is becoming more and more substantiated. That idea we really had here in our country, in Varginha, in the south of Minas, not only the biggest case in the history of Brazilian ufology, but worldwide. And we made a point of showing, within the integrated pest management itself, something that you, Edson, know, that we as researchers have known for a long time. But it's necessary for people to know how much the Army documented the entire operation of attempted fraud. That's the right word, adulteration of the facts to support that absurd idea of Mr. Mourinho, right? So, another colleague of ours, actually, Fernando Ramalho, even today in his lecture, he listed as crimes the actions that we can prove were committed by the Brazilian army itself within this story to sell it to the public, something that obviously from the beginning we knew made no sense at all.
Yeah, in this case, this change in attitude, right, from Birajara Franco Rodriguez, whom we knew, right, he was there researching with us. What do you think happened? Was it something really strong that made him change, or is it really just his own way of thinking?
No, I usually say the following considering everything he did in the past. In fact, I said exactly what I'm about to say now at the beginning of my lecture. Considering everything he did in terms of bringing evidence to the case, he publicized it, involved people, convinced the world about the reality of the Varginha case. Today, to simply say that he was mistaken, that he regrets it, is something that can't be done. I can't take it seriously. In other words, I usually say the following: to take seriously what he says today, which obviously we don't do. To begin with, I would have to consider that he was the most irresponsible person who has ever appeared in Brazilian and world ufology because of what he did in the past, because there's no other alternative. Either you, Birajara Rodriguez, are what you show yourself to be today, or you are what you showed yourself to be in the past. And in my view, Birajara Rodriguez, in reality, the real one is the one from the past.
And we know here that you are also releasing a book, 30 Years, Cas Varginha, and so on. What can readers expect from this new work of yours?
This work, it started being written in 2024. Then I paused the writing process as well because I was sure that in these last months of this year, we would have, let's say, the materialization of a series of facts that were being developed by the research itself in various areas. And I was right. Just look at what happened in these last months. The revelation of new explosive testimonies like Dr. Ito Venturelli. We had, for example, the acceptance of several other people who are now at least willing to talk to me. These are people from the circle of the main military authorities involved with the story who are even giving me contacts I didn't have before. Of those military personnel I mentioned at the event itself today in my morning lecture, so that I can seek interaction, at least talk to these people, because the time has come for them to leave this process of submission to the cover-up and to superior orders, and at the very least start talking about part of the reality that we know. So I can guarantee. I even thought about showing a screenshot of the conversation I've been having with one of them, but I realized, you see, Edson, that if I did that today, it would certainly harm the other people whose contact process is still ongoing. So we're reaching this moment where we realize that each of those military authorities, even the ones from Fundo de Minas, especially those who always denied everything, today they're practically speaking openly. The truth, at least to that circle of very close relatives, to people who go to barbecues together, and they're saying what we know is true. So if they've already started this kind of process, why not just admit it, accept it? Talk to the main investigators involved, or even directly with the media if necessary, to definitively establish the truth. These people can't die, to be clear, as some unfortunately already have, passing away in some of these cases and taking with them this kind of truth, which is a truth that all of humanity has the right to know.
That's it then, the brief words here from my friend Marco Antonio Petit. We're together, we are. It's to keep the flame of the Varginha case alive.
For sure. And you can expect many more revelations within this joint work that's being carried out.